Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Unit 4 introductory PowerPoint. Unit 4 in your textbook is entitled The Quest for Freedom, the Civil War and its Aftermath. Now, your textbook specifically focuses on the American Civil War, but we will be discussing how the essential questions from this unit and some of the texts that we're going to read relate to our society today, as we have done in the past. So our essential questions for this unit, the first one is, when is self-determination possible? Self-determination is the ability to decide one's own fate or course of action freely and without compulsion. The United States fought a war of independence for that right, but even in the land of the free, there were many who were denied the right of self-determination. Enslaved Africans were considered the property of those who owned them, and could be forced to do whatever their owners wanted. Women often lacked self-determination in many areas of their lives as well. What obstacles to self-determination still exist? So when we're looking at this question, we're really asking ourselves, what inhibits or stops us from being able to make our own choices? And this is a problem that definitely still exists today. And I know that our book talks about how, the United States, enslaved Africans lacked self-determination, but some would make the argument that many people in the United States still lack this ability. The second essential question for this unit is, what divides us as human beings? Throughout history, human beings have found many things to divide us: race, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, gender, politics, social class, and occupation, just to name some. In the first half of the 19th century, slavery was one of many issues that divided America. What issues divide Americans today? How can we focus on our similarities so we can live together in an inclusive society? Now, I want to challenge you to think about what this means, not just for Americans, but for people. Look at the society we live in today and all the different nationalities, ethnicities, political opinions that are represented in this country. So, again, when we're looking and starting to do some of the assignments involving these questions, I want you to consider, what does this mean for us on a global platform? The third essential question is, how do we face defeat? Early in the Civil War, the North faced defeat after defeat at the hands of the South's military leaders. Despite these early setbacks, the North endured, and its victory at the Battle of Gettysburg marked the turning point in the Civil War. After the war, parts of the South were in ruins, and the reunited country faced a long, difficult period of healing and rebuilding. What makes some shrink from defeat? What makes others rise to the challenge? So we will look at what state the United States was in right after the Civil War, and it wasn't pretty. It was destroyed, as a lot of countries are after war. But what was more difficult in this sense was that we were fighting ourselves. And so, the entire nation in a lot of ways was in shambles. But when we're thinking about this, even though when we see countries being defeated, or you lose battles, or you get discouraged about something, what causes us or gives us the ability to persevere? What's that internal drive? And the last essential question for this unit is, what is the price of progress? During the 19th century, the United States progressed at a rapid pace. New frontiers were being explored, and new inventions pushed the boundaries of farming and industry. However, there were unintended consequences to this swift march of progress. The environment suffered, and there were unintended. The environment also suffered as rivers were diverted, forests cleared, mines dug, and oil wells drilled. Too many people, especially those in cities, felt frantic and soulless. Today, some people prioritize progress above all else, while others warn to proceed with caution. Is progress always worth the cost? So consider, in today's society, we're currently destroying rainforests to make room for more crops. And, we've made all these animals go on the endangered species list. And sometimes in progress, we hurt other people. So where do we draw the line? At what point do we say, hey, we can do this, but perhaps we shouldn't because it's not going to benefit most people? Now, we're going to get into some of the history of the Civil War and the Reconstruction era and this period of American history in general, because most of the texts that we're going to read come from this era. So as usual, it's really important that you understand at least the general frame of where this literature is coming from. So the Civil War and its aftermath. Since colonial times, there has been a sharp regional difference between the industrial North and the agrarian South. So what that means is the northern states in the United States were entirely focused on industry. This is where you'll have your factories, your textile mills, all of these things. And the South was focused on growing things, especially tobacco and cotton. Those were two of the main crops that came from the South. By the mid-1800s, the economy of the South had become almost completely dependent on its workforce of about 3 million enslaved people, most of which were from Africa. Now, while some Americans settled for compromise, others pushed for an end to slavery and other social industries. The North did not have slaves. The South obviously heavily relied on slaves. So they fought over whether new states coming into the Union should be slave states or non-slave states. And this problem ended up blowing up. Now, abolitionists were people that fought to abolish or get rid of slavery. They led the fight by forming organizations, holding conventions, publishing newspapers, swamping Congress with petitions for the sole purpose of ending what many considered an evil institution, slavery. Abolition is the idea of abolishing or getting rid of slavery, and the people that promoted abolition are called abolitionists. Narratives by abolitionists such as Harriet Beecher Stowe and former slaves such as Frederick Douglass helped bring the evils of slavery to life for many readers. The texts written by these abolitionists provoke a lot of imagery and a lot of the horrors that were happening to the people in these predicaments. Now, within slavery, and one of the efforts of the abolitionists was the Underground Railroad, like this escape route for enslaved people. The Underground Railroad was an informal network of abolitionists that helped thousands of slaves escape to freedom. So it was illegal to help slaves escape, but these people did it anyways. They would get slaves from these big plantations and they would hide them in houses, in attics or wherever they could hide them, in different houses or businesses, all the way from the South to the North, out of the United States into Canada. Now, working for abolition made women more aware of the rights they had been denied, because some of the people that were fighting to free these slaves weren't entirely free themselves, women being a big part of this, because women didn't, for example, have the right to vote until 1919 in America, so long after the Civil War. So this movement, or being part of the abolitionist movement, helped women realize that they also deserve these rights. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who we may talk about in the next unit, a big suffragette or a woman that fought for the right to vote for women. Lucretia Mott and other reformers fought for women's rights, including the right to vote. Now, a country divided. By 1850, the country was equally divided into free and slave states. In Congress, the debate raged on, with some claiming a state's right to choose for itself on the issue of slavery. So slave states wanted, obviously, more slave states, and free states wanted more free states, because let's suppose there's not an even number of free states and slave states, then that particular one, so let's say there are more slave states than free states, the slave states have more power then in Congress or the government of America. So they can then pass laws that favor other slave states. So it was a big issue as new states were starting to come into the Union. What are they going to be? Are they going to be slave states or free states? And that can entirely change the government, the Congress. So Abraham Lincoln, who was a congressman at the time, promised that he wouldn't abolish slavery, but he did vow to stop the spread of it. So he wasn't going to make it so you had to free all your slaves, but he wanted to make all the new states coming in free states to stop the spread of slavery. So for him, it wasn't really a political issue. It wasn't the issue of, free states or slave states. It was an issue of right or wrong, and he believed that holding another human being and treating them like an animal was wrong, like I would hope many of us feel. So when he was elected as president in 1860, the southern states seceded or left the Union. They were like, peace out, we're done with you, we're not doing this. We don't want any part of your government. So the southern states straight up said, we're leaving the country. That doesn't mean they moved. They just were like, nope, we're our new country now. We are the Confederate States of America. You guys could be the Union States. Khalli walli about you. We don't care. In 1861, Confederates fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina, and the Civil War officially began. In the image on the right, you can see there's like this little square box that's being fired on. This is Fort Sumter, and it was held by the Union Army, aka the Free State Army, and it was fired on by the South, which obviously is a declaration of war, and the whole war. I mean, you could spend days or weeks studying the Civil War. There's a lot that happened, but we won't do that. But it carried on for some years with just Americans killing other Americans, brother versus brother, uncle versus uncle, and it was a horrible, horrible moment in American history. However, by the end of the war in April 1865, approximately 620,000 men had died, which is nearly as many people that have died in all other wars the USA has ever fought combined. So more people died in the Civil War than in all of our other wars combined, which, if you think about it, is crazy. So rebuilding a nation. After the Civil War, we're left with a country that's more or less in ruins. And some people are still really hating other people in their family. So we have to rebuild this. Now, with the end of the Civil War came reunification of the United States. Sorry, it's a rough word. What does that mean? It means we're rejoining our states. We're not going to be two different countries anymore. We'll be friends again. This period of healing and rebuilding came to be known as Reconstruction. Now, the Reconstruction era, if you ever study this in history, that's what it'll be called, is a very turbulent time. If you ever experienced turbulence in an airplane, you know that, the plane shakes around and it doesn't feel like you're going to live for a hot second. That more or less describes America in a nutshell during this period. Now, during the war, Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, freeing all the enslaved people in the South. The thing that he said he wasn't going to do, he ended up having to do. Now, can you imagine all these slave states, these 3 million slaves, and this piece of paper comes from the government that says they're free now. They can just leave. If you paid good money for these people, for these workers, you'll be very upset that they're now all of a sudden saying, well, the people you bought you don't actually own them. And, oh, sorry, your economy's busted because you don't have the manpower to actually build your crops. And it was a huge issue.